But not only in New York did Vladimir Putin's move to escalate the war trigger backlash. There's growing opposition to the mobilization at home as well. Police have arrested more than 1,300 people demonstrating against the call-up of reservists. Rights groups report that some detained protesters have been forced to enlist while in custody. Now, many, especially young men, are seizing what they fear could be their last chance to leave the country.
Making a touchdown in Istanbul, just a day after Russia announced a military draft. Many Russian men are jumping on whatever flights they can find out of Moscow. Turkey, where arriving Russian passengers don't require a visa for entry, is a popular choice.
The mobilization is one of the reasons why I'm here. I feel that not really lots of Russian people want to fight and want to be mobilized and want to go to the army. So that's it.
In Serbia, where short-term Russian visitors can also enter visa-free, fully packed flights arrived from Moscow. As panic has surged the demand for one-way flights, flights to Turkey, Serbia, as well as Armenia and Azerbaijan have entirely sold out. Reports of a mass exodus of young men have been downplayed by the Kremlin, which claims the situation is exaggerated. But those arriving in Serbia say the fear of conscription is real.
War is horrible, so it's okay to be afraid of war and of death and of such things. It's hard for everyone. It's a difficult situation.
At the land border with Finland, a long queue of Russian cars has lined up to cross. Finland is now Russia's last remaining EU neighbor that still allows the entry of Russian Schengen visa holders. But while Finland prepares to limit or ban the entry of Russian tourists, and as flights out of Moscow become unavailable, it may be now or never for those wanting to avoid the draft.
A European Commission spokesperson for migration says EU countries need to find a joint approach on considering asylum for Russians fleeing their country to avoid military service. Currently, EU member states are divided over letting in Russian citizens. As we just heard, Finland, which has the longest EU border with Russia, has reported an increase in incoming traffic at its border. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, as well as Poland, have implemented tougher restrictions, essentially closing their borders to Russians. To the south, Russian vehicles seeking to cross into non-EU member Georgia are reportedly waiting up to 12 hours to cross. And I'm now joined by Ilya Ponomarev. He's a former member of the Russian parliament and today lives in exile in Ukraine. Mr. Ponomarev, thanks for being on the day tonight. Are you surprised to see thousands of people trying to leave Russia after this mobilization was announced?
No, I'm not surprised at all. It was very much obvious that this mobilization would be extremely unpopular among Russians. And that's why Vladimir Putin was hesitant for such a long time to actually announce it. And even when he did the announcement, he announced it as like a partial mobilization, but in fact, obviously, it's a general mobilization. It's a mass mobilization. It's a mobilization without any significant exemptions. It's mobilization that would affect everyone, and that's what we already start seeing on the streets of Russian cities.
Can you elaborate on that a bit? Because yesterday it was announced that it would be 300,000 reservists that would be drawn into service, but there has been the number 1 million floating around. Where does that discrepancy come from, and why is there such a confused way of communicating what this actually is?
Yeah, this 1 million is the source in the presidential staff in Moscow, which is, I would say, like a mole, but it's a person who really despises what's going on, and he leaked the information. I think that we at Утро Февраля, or February's Morning TV channel, were the first to publish this information, but then it was published from the same source in several other media. And that's a point in Vinci paragraph in Putin's decree on the mobilization that was hidden, so-called paragraph 7. which was not published, and obviously that was attributed to the number of the records. And I think that Kremlin is just trying to downplay the number, but 1 million is the number that I personally believe.
And that attempt to downplay the efforts that are starting now, do you attribute them to an attempt to downplay how bad it is going for Russia in Ukraine?
It is very bad, but obviously for Vladimir Putin, it's a binary situation. You know, if he announced the mobilization, that means the situation is bad, and in terms of how bad it is, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's 300 or 3 million people. What matters is the reaction of the Russian society, because just statistically, if it is 300, you know, what is the probability that I personally would be drafted? If it is 1 million, then the probability is 3 times higher, and that obviously makes people shake.
People being drafted against their will, people taking to the streets, is that really something that would impress Putin all that much at this point?
He has no way to go, you know. It's not a question of being impressed. I think that he's very much impressed by what Ukrainian military has done so far. It's impressive enough. But now what is the option for him? He needs to claim victory at any cost, because if he is not claiming victory, even if it is just a stalemate, then he is a dead person, literally. And I think that he understands this clearly. That's why for him, you know, he is choosing between two evils, and it really doesn't matter what would be the backlash of the Russian population. He just needs to win the war or die.
You yourself went into exile 8 years ago. What would be your recommendation for the people now trying to flee the country to not be drafted into this war?
I didn't go into exile. I was not allowed to come back to my country, and that's an important difference, because I was never willing to flee the country. And I think that right now we need to put a fight. I don't want to judge anyone who wants to leave. You know, not everybody are fighters, but really, you know, I would love to see my compatriots stay home and to put up the fight. And that's exactly what I am doing in Ukraine. I am organizing everybody with Russian passports to be trained with arms to come back to Russia and put up the fight.
All right. I want to talk about something else. Today there was a prisoner swap between Ukraine and Russia. 215 Ukrainian POWs for 55 Russians. That's almost 4 Ukrainian soldiers to every Russian one. What do you make of that numerical difference? What do you read into it?
There was one guy for whom it was done. His name is Viktor Medvedchuk. He is Putin's relative, who happened to be Ukrainian. And that's why he agreed to such an exchange. So obviously it's a major victory, diplomatic victory for President Zelensky, just another one, where he was getting all the heroes of Ukraine back, fighters from Azov, you know, people who are really admired by Ukrainians. So the morale of Ukrainian soldiers was already very high after the victories in Kharkiv. And now it's even higher because they understand that they would be cared of by the Ukrainian state, that the Ukrainian state would actually protect them, while Russians would not.
You were the only person in the Russian parliament who voted against the annexation of Crimea in 2014. How do you feel today about the sham referendums planned this weekend to annex 4 occupied territories in Ukraine?
That referendum of 2014, as it turned out, was a sham. And it was a complete imitation of a democratic procedure. But right now, there is not even an imitation of democratic procedure. They would just announce something. And the objective of this is pretty obvious. They just need to have a formal grounds to annex the territory, so to be able to deploy draftees, because by law you cannot put draftees on somebody else's soil without declaring a war. And they need to have a legal context to allow them to be deployed in these so-called Donetsk or Luhansk people republics by announcing them the Russian territory. This is as simple as that. And they right now they don't care for legitimacy. And ironically, even hardcore Russian patriots, so people who are for the war, even those guys are against this decision because they understand that the way it's been done, it would never be legitimate. It would never be recognized as a legitimate act, and that the whole Russian statehood would be blown apart by the decisions like this.
Ilya Ponomarev, he's a Russian opposition politician currently in Ukraine. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.